Yo, what's going on, guys? It's the Draft Nerd, and today we're going to be going over my top 10 wide receivers in the 2025 NFL Draft. Now, this will not, and I repeat, will not be my final rankings of the draft. This video is being made on the 1st of January, and I will probably be doing another one in late March, early April. This is just what I think of these prospects as of January 1st. This is before Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, Draft Combine. It's even before the end of the college football playoffs. But this is just my top 10 right now. This is a really good wide receiver class, maybe not the top end talent like last year with Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, but there are some really good receivers at the top of the draft board with some really good depth as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, coming in at number 10, we got Xavier Restrepo, the receiver out of Miami, and he's 5'10", 198 pounds. So yes, he isn't the biggest guy in the world. He'll most likely be a slot-only player in the NFL, but when you really watch Restrepo, he's a really smart and savvy receiver. If you look at some of the grades I have for him, again, he's not the fastest guy. You're not going to really want him on many vertical routes just because his long speed isn't very great or his contested catch ability at being only 5'10", sub 200 pounds. But what you really like with Xavier Restrepo and what I really like when watching his tape is, for one, he has some really good short area quickness and change of direction. He just doesn't have that long speed, that, second, third gear. But he's also really, really good with his feet. He's got exceptional footwork. He has a really good route tree. He knows just about every route. He's definitely better with those, slant routes, quick ins, dig routes. He's really good at finding the empty space and zone coverage. Just a really smart receiver, good footwork. He's able to swipe his hands to break press release if he does get pressed in the slot. He's got really, reliable and solid hands as well. Like I said earlier, though, not the best at contested catch. I got a C+ for him there. And then for his run after catch ability, I do have it as a B. And yes, he does have some, shiftiness, short area quickness, but, with that long speed being what it is, he's not going to be that dangerous after the catch. He might be able to make a guy or two miss, but I don't think he's going to break off many big, massive runs in the NFL. But if a team's looking for a really smart and savvy wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 3, I think Xavier Restrepo is that guy for the team. Moving on to number 9, we got Savon Williams, the receiver out of TCU, and he's a really big receiver at 6'5", 225 pounds. And I do have a top 75 grade on him, so a day 2 pick. He's got really good long speed for his size, especially. His burst isn't anything great. Again, he is 6'5", 225, so he's got a lot of weight to, kind of lug around. But he does have good change of direction. I'll get into it in a little bit. He is very good after the catch. He is a bit of a raw route runner, though. He's got good speed, so I got his deep routes as an A-, but for the most part, he's just not a nuanced route runner. C+ for release. He does get a little jammed up when, receivers play physical. He doesn't have, the best footwork. His hands can be a bit clunky as well, B+. He just doesn't look like a natural pass catcher. A lot of times he'll, be a body catcher when I would much rather, especially when you're 6'5", to be able to just pluck the ball out of the air with your hands. He doesn't necessarily do that. And same with contested catches. He does look a little awkward when, going up into the air and adjusting to the ball. But with that size, you're going to be able to be a good contested catch player. So that is why I have him as an A-. But, his main calling card is run after the catch. When you get the ball into his hands, he's able to make special plays happen, whether that's with, his ability to make people miss, his short area quickness, his long speed even. He's just a really good weapon to have when you get the ball into his hands. And with guys like Savon Williams, they like to put him into a tier. He's either a Deebo Samuel, top tier, or he's a Laviska Shenault. I think he's more so a Cordero Patterson type of player where, Cordero Patterson was a really good kick returner. Started off as a receiver in the NFL with the Vikings, transitioned more to a running back. And I can see Savon Williams being that type of player where he does play receiver, but even TCU has him, run a couple plays at running back. Just to get the ball into his hands. I could see him having a very similar career path to a guy like Cordero Patterson. And I wouldn't be surprised if Savon Williams does move to running back at some point in his career. Just because he isn't that nuanced as a route runner, and I'm afraid that he won't be able to create enough separation to stick at receiver full time. But I do think he's going to be a really good kick returner, especially with the new kickoff rules in the NFL. And I think he's going to be a dangerous threat when he gets the ball into his hands. You just got to be able to get the ball into his hands. Moving on to number 8, we got Jaden Higgins, the receiver out of Iowa State. And he's 6'4", 215 pounds, so another big receiver. I got a top 75 grade on him as well. And athletically, he's nothing special, B+ across the board. But what you really like with Jaden Higgins is he's just a really smart and physical player. You know, he's pretty smooth for his size. You know, when you see receivers, you know, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", you think of him as being a clunky route runner who's, you know, pretty stiff in the hips. And although I don't think he's special in this regard, I do think he is a very fluid mover. Again, athletically, his speed isn't anything special, but he's got some fluid movement skills. And he's got a really good ability to get in and out of his breaks pretty fast for being 6'4", 215 pounds. You know, I think he could be a big-bodied X receiver. You know, he might not be a wide receiver 1 for a team, but I think he could be that alpha receiver. I mean, I really like Jaden Higgins on a team like the Lions, where they got their number 1 guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, J-Mo being that deep threat. I think Jaden Higgins could be that big-bodied, you know, physical receiver, and he's also a pretty good blocker as well. Another thing he's really good at is his release packages. He's able to get off the line of scrimmage. Not many cornerbacks can kind of jam him up. Got really solid hands, a good contested catch player at 6'4" again. You know, nothing special after the catch, but you don't expect that from a 6'4", 215-pound guy. Not everyone's like a Savon Williams. But some of the cons I do have for him is, you know, average speed, nothing special. And he does push off a little bit, especially on deep balls and, you know, maybe jump balls, contested catch situations. I am afraid that in the NFL, he's going to get called for a lot of offensive pass interference just because he's, you know, a physical guy is going to try to push off to create that separation, box defenders out to get that, you know, contested catch ball. And I think he's going to get called for, you know, a few penalties here and there for that. And then he also just doesn't offer much after the catch. Like I mentioned, he's a big guy. That's not what you're going to draft him for. But overall, I think Jaden Higgins is a really good player if you need that, you know, big-bodied receiver to not necessarily be your number 1 guy. Because I don't necessarily think Jaden Higgins has the capabilities to be the best receiver on your team. But I do think he could be the X receiver. Moving on to number 7, we got Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Another bigger receiver, 6'3", 210 pounds. And I still have a top 75 grade on him. All these guys I think will make it to the 2nd and 3rd round. I don't think they're first-round picks. Similar to Jaden Higgins, not, you know, the most special athlete, B+ speed, B+ burst, and only a B change of direction, but he is another big-bodied receiver who, you know, some people have problems with his release. They don't think he can, you know, get off of press coverage, and from what I've seen, he's not terrible at it. I mean, it's definitely not, you know, a massive strength for him, but I don't see him getting jammed up too much. I think he's a bit of an average route runner as of right now. I don't think he creates the most separation, but he's another guy similar to maybe definitely a less athletic Xavier Leggett from last year. Someone who's got a bit of a simple route tree, you know, comebacks, go balls, you know, 10-yard ins, 10-yard outs, things like that. I think that's what Trey Harris thrives in. He's not the most nuanced route runner, but the routes he does run are pretty good. He's got really solid hands. That's why I got an A for that. And I do think he can go up and get the ball. Again, he's 6'3", 210 pounds, and I don't necessarily think he pushes off as much as a guy like Jaden Higgins. You know, I do have in his cons that he doesn't use his hands to break press. I think if he was to incorporate using his hands more to, you know, chop the hands down of the defenders, I think he could improve a lot with his release package. That's the one thing I do have on his cons. And then he won't make you miss after the catch. Again, another big X receiver. Not, you know, his expertise is to make people miss and, you know, getting a lot of yards after the catch. He's going to be that big-bodied X receiver. But I'm a big fan of Trey Harris. To begin the year, I had him as my number 4 receiver. He's dropped down here to number 7, but I still think I'm pretty high on Trey Harris. From, you know, most people's lists I've seen, he's not even in the top 10, which I think is a little bit crazy. Maybe I'm just really high on Trey Harris like I was with Troy Franklin from last year. I usually have one guy who I'm a bit higher on than most people, and I think this year it is going to be Trey Harris. Moving on to number 6, though, we got Alec Ayumanor, the wide receiver from Stanford, and he's also a big receiver at 6'2", 210 pounds, and I do have a top 50 grade on him. I think he will probably slip to the 2nd round, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's a first round wide receiver come draft day. You know, unlike some of these other guys, I do have him as an A- for speed. He does have a bit of a track background, so his long speed is really good. His burst isn't anything special, though, and his change of direction isn't. But, you know, if you give him a free release and he's, you know, building up speed, he's a very fast player. You know, he's just a hardworking player. Again, he's not the most fluid athlete, so his route running is a little bit shaky at times, but he's able to create separation. If you take a look back, not this year, but the year before when he played Colorado, he absolutely obliterated Travis Hunter. He went for like 200 plus yards against Travis Hunter. So he has the ability to be a massive target in the pass game. I just don't think Stanford necessarily prioritizes Elika Umanor like I think they should. Like I said, good long speed, really good release package. He's got good footwork, good size at 6'2", and he's also a phenomenal blocker. That might be his biggest strength. Not a lot of receivers like to block. They like to catch passes and get touchdowns. Elika Umanor will block his butt off. And this is another receiver, maybe in the first round even. I think if Elika Umanor goes in the first round, it's because the Detroit Lions draft him. He just seems like a Detroit Lions player. Again, he could be that X receiver, which is what they're kind of lacking, and he's able to block. The Lions love receivers that can block. I think Elika Umanor is a perfect fit for the Lions. But he does have a little bit of an injury history. I believe it would be 3 years now. He tore a bunch of ligaments in his knee at ACL, MCL, meniscus, really bad knee injury. But he seems to fully be recovered from that. But it is just something you got to look for. We'll see if anything comes out when he does his medicals at the draft combine, but I think he'll be fine when it comes to that. It doesn't create much separation with his routes. That's something he does need to improve on. And for his size, I would like to see him be a little bit better of a contested catch player. That's a bit of the part of the game I want to see him work on, but I do think he will improve on that in the NFL. But yeah, like I said, big fan of Elika Umanor. I got him as my number 6 receiver in the draft. Moving on to number 5, we got Isaiah Bond, the receiver out of Texas. Now, he's a bit of a smaller guy, 5'11", 180 pounds. I do got a top 50 grade on him. He's another player I could see maybe getting into the first round, but most likely a second round type of guy. I got A+ for his speed. I mean, when you're going to be 180 pounds, you got to be able to run, in the 4.3s at least. And I do think he will get into the 4.3s, maybe even in the 4.2s. He kind of took that position Xavier Worthy held at Texas, just that speed, deep threat. I think he's got really good burst as well, good lateral movement, just a really good athlete altogether. He wasn't the most productive guy at Texas, and I think that was just, they just weren't on the same page, him and Quinn Ewers, or when Arch Manning was in the games. Just weren't on the same page with him. He had a bit of a weird season at Texas, but when you turn on the tape, he's open. I got A- for his short routes, B for his medium routes, and A- for his deep routes. He didn't get as many targets as expected, but when you turn on that tape, he's almost always open. He might get a little bit jammed up when he does get pressed, though. That's why I have his release as a B-. I do think he'll be more of a slot player in the NFL, just because he's not going to be able to deal with those more physical defenders. But he's got solid hands, not a contested catch player at 5'11", 180. You're not going to draft him to do that. But he is really good after the catch as well with that, really good speed and burst. Overall, I think he's going to be a really good slot player. Don't think he's going to be able to, stay on the outside, at least. I don't think he's going to be able to play the majority of his snaps on the outside, but if a team drafts him and knows how to play him, he's going to be a really, really good player. Moving on to number 4, we got Emeka Abuka, the receiver out of Ohio State, and he's 6'1", 205 pounds, so he's got good size to him, and this is my first round 1 player, the first of 4. He's not the most athletically gifted guy in the world, B+ for his long speed, but he does have good short area quickness and really good footwork and change of direction skills. When I think of Emeka Abuka, he kind of reminds me of a guy like Puka Nacua. Obviously, Puka Nacua wasn't as well known coming into the NFL, but once he got to the NFL and got his opportunity, he's a really good, smart player. I think Emeka Abuka is similar to that, where he's just a smart player, knows how to, get open in zone coverage, really good footwork. He's just a smart, good player, and he's also really good with the ball in his hands as well. I got an A- for his after the catch ability. Super shifty in the slot on short routes especially. He's able to create a lot of separation on slant routes, zig routes, quick ins, quick outs. Just really good footwork when it comes to that stuff. And he's creative after the catch. Again, he does have the longest speed in the world, similar to maybe a JSN. I think he's a bit faster than a Jackson Smith and Jigba, but he's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's still good after the catch because he just knows how to make people miss, and he's got a good center of gravity as well. I don't think he's going to be able to play full-time on the outside, though. I do think he's going to be more so a slot receiver. I don't think he's only going to be designated to the slot, but majority of his snaps are going to come from the slot. He's an average athlete, and he's not a contested catch type of player. C+, that's not what you're going to ask him to do. He does somewhat have the height, but when you watch the tape, he's not a contested catch player. And another thing to mention maybe is that in 2023, he had a bit of a down season. He dealt with, just lingering injuries and stuff like that. A lot of people try to knock him for that. I'm not that type of guy. He just had a down season with injuries and stuff. He's bounced back in 2024, and I think he's a round one receiver, almost a lock to be in the first round in my opinion. I'm a big fan of Mecca Abuka. All right, coming in at number 3, we got Burton, the receiver out of Missouri, 5'11", 208 pounds. So maybe not the tallest guy in the world, but he does have a lot of weight to his frame at 208 pounds. He's a round one receiver. I would be shocked if he doesn't go in the first round. He's just really athletically gifted. A's across the board when it comes to athleticism. Whether it's short area quickness, change of direction, footwork, speed, long speed, he's got it all. He's a smooth route runner. Doesn't create as much separation out as I would want him to. I'm not going to say he doesn't create separation, but, with his athletic ability, I would want to see him create a little bit more separation. He's a big play threat, especially after the catch. He's, he almost turns into a running back when he gets the ball into his hands. That's how good he is. He's got really good body control when going up for contested catches. Again, he's 5'11", but he can go up and snag balls out of the air. He's able to climb the ladder for sure. Some of the things that I do have knocks with him, though, is at times it looks like he's a little bit uninterested. He didn't get targeted as much as you would think for a receiver as good as Burton on a team that, doesn't have that much talent around him. So I do think he was a little uninterested at times, but I don't think that'll be a problem when he gets to the NFL. And then I also do think he relies a little too much on his athleticism. Like I said, I think he should be a bit of a better route runner and a more, and able to create more separation. I just think he relies on his athleticism too much and not enough on the nuance of route running. But I think that'll get fixed in the NFL. I really, except for maybe his size at 5'11", and, teams might not want to play him on the outside too much. Other than that, I don't see any flaws with Burton. I think he's a really, really good receiver and should be taken in, the top 20 of the draft. All right, coming in at number 2, we do have Travis Hunter. Obviously, he's a cornerback receiver. He plays both. This has nothing to do with Travis Hunter as a cornerback. This is solely Travis Hunter as a receiver. Whether you think he's going to play receiver in the NFL or not, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm just focused on what I've seen on tape at Colorado as a receiver. He's 6'1", 185 pounds, so a little bit smaller, but, absolutely gifted when it comes to athleticism. A's across the board, and maybe even they could probably be A+. He's an absolutely gifted athlete. He's just amazing at getting in and out of his cuts. He almost loses no speed when making cuts. He has enough speed to beat you deep as well. Creative release package. He's a bit of a smaller receiver, so you got to be able to have good footwork, good, craftiness to kind of get off of press coverage. And I think he can at times. He does get jammed up a little bit, but he's also a really good contested catch guy. 6'1", 185. That body type isn't usually the best when it comes to contested catches, but Travis Hunter is just, he's just an anomaly. The dude is absolutely amazing with the ball in the air. He's able to come down with almost any catch. He's able to contort his body any type of way. And I think that does go into why he's such a good cornerback as well. But we're not going to talk about that. We'll talk about that when we rank the cornerbacks. Some of the problems I do have with Travis Hunter, though, is, 185. That's a bit light. I'm not going to say I want to get him to 200, but I just have problems. I'm scared that he might get a little bit bullied during his routes if he goes up against more physical cornerbacks. Another con is he just hasn't dedicated full-time to receiver. He might not even play receiver in the NFL. He might just be a full-time cornerback. We don't know. It's kind of a question that teams are going to have to answer. Whoever, he's probably going to go number 1 overall. So whichever team that is, they're going to have to answer that question. And then he also isn't too physical during his routes. Like I said, he'll get bumped off his routes a few times here and there if he goes against a more physical corner. But overall, I think he's a really gifted receiver. I do think he's a bit better as a cornerback. But being the number 2 receiver in the 2025 NFL draft class, that's pretty good for being a part-time receiver, basically. And then moving on to number 1, we got Teto McMillan from Arizona. A big-bodied guy at 6'5", 212 pounds, and I do think he'll probably end up being the first, full-time receiver. I think Travis Hunter will probably go ahead of Teto McMillan, but I think Teto McMillan will be the first pure receiver taken in the draft. He's got really good long speed for his frame at 6'5". Doesn't necessarily have the lateral movement or the burst to go along with that, but what he lacks in athleticism, he makes up with absolute glue for hands and his phenomenal ability to go up and get contested catches. Like I said, he's got hands made of glue. He's got solid top end speed, nothing insane, but he's just got long strides, and he's an absolute monster in the red zone. Like I said, he's able to go up, climb the ladder. He's taller than any cornerback he goes up against. Plus, he has amazing leaping ability. If you throw the ball up, 8 times out of 10, Teto McMillan's coming down with that ball. A lot of people like to compare him to Mike Evans, And I don't necessarily think he's a Mike Evans. Mike Evans was just a bigger guy. Teto McMillan's only 212 pounds. He has a little bit of a slighter frame. You know, Mike Evans was just built. He was big and tall. Teto McMillan, not necessarily big, just tall. But they have similar play styles. Both can, you know, snack contested balls and have hands made of glue. I can see where the comparison is, but I just think Mike Evans was a whole tier above Teto McMillan. You know, he doesn't create too much separation on his routes. You know, for being a bigger guy at 6'5" and a more high-waisted guy, he's not terrible when getting in and out of his breaks. But when you are 6'5", it is kind of hard to create separation in and out of your breaks. It's just how the game goes. He takes a while to build up speed. Once he gets to top speed, though, he is pretty fast. And he doesn't offer too much after the catch. He can break a few tackles here and there, but he's not going to, like, make anyone miss by any means. But I do think Teto McMillan could be your number one receiver and be that X receiver for a team. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes top 5, top 10 in the NFL draft. He's a really, really good talent at receiver. But that's going to do it. Let me know what you guys think of my list down in the comments. You know, some honorable mentions can go to guys like Evan Stewart, who I just think haven't fully put it together yet. Tez Johnson's just really small, but he's a really good receiver. Jack Besh just missed the list. He was my number 11 receiver. Jalen Noel, I really like. Jalen Royals as well. Pat Bryant. There's a lot of good receivers down the board. But, you know, these are my top 10. Let me know where I went wrong at down in the comments. And if you like the video, consider subscribing. And as always, this is the Draft Nerd, and thanks for watching.